but it shows that they are inspired by them, and it makes the whole thing, if anything, slightly murkier.
Frank Gardner, our security correspondent. Now to a linked story in Germany, because every Monday for the past few months, hundreds, even thousands of people have marched through the city of Dresden in support of a group calling itself Patriotic Europeans Against the Islamization of the West, or Pegida. Another march is planned for today, with larger numbers expected to participate because of what happened in Paris. But under the circumstances, political leaders are calling on the marchers to cancel. The Justice Minister, Heiko Maas, said it was disgusting how the protest organisers were trying to use the events of the last week to whip up hatred against Muslims. Mr. Maas said that before the attacks, Pegida had even criticised journalists.
Das sind die gleichen Leute, die letzten Montag
These are the very same people who called journalists the liar press, and now they want to wear a black ribbon. It can't get more hypocritical than that. I'm glad that the French cartoonists have distanced themselves very clearly from Pegida.
Well, an hour ago on the newsroom, we spoke to our correspondent Jenny Hill in Dresden at an anti-Pegida protest. Jenny, where are you now?
I'm at the area where the Pegida protesters are gathering, and I have to say Pegida is enjoying phenomenal public support. Already I can see a good couple of thousand people here. Hundreds more are pouring into this square. There are German flags flying, there are banners held aloft. I can see a couple here. There's Stop Multiculturalism, there's Put an End to Immigration, a couple of fairly unsavoury messages directed at Angela Merkel. There is no doubting the strength of public feeling in this crowd. Pegida has attracted some extraordinary numbers in recent weeks. 18,000 people marched through Dresden last Monday in support of this movement, which purports to campaign against what they say is the Islamification of Europe. They're concerned, they say, about the influence of radical Islam on countries like Germany, but they're attracting crowds who tend to shout fairly right-wing slogans, extremists certainly, but also what might be described as ordinary people who are concerned about levels of immigration to Germany. Immigration's at a 20-year high here, but it's something which is concerning a lot of other people in Germany. In fact, on Saturday, 35,000 people turned out to protest against Pegida. The political establishment here is also very concerned. Angela Merkel and other senior politicians have come out and publicly condemned Pegida. They're particularly annoyed by the decision to march today, a march which is dedicated to the victims of the Paris shootings. They're calling it a Trauermarsch, literally a mourning march. But you know, the number of people coming here now, we're a quarter of an hour perhaps away from the official start time, and it looks to me as though they'll be attracting a record crowd tonight.
And briefly, a lot more than you saw at the anti-Pegida protest earlier.
Yeah, the anti-Pegida protest I was at was one of two which were held quite a bit earlier in the day, in fairness, so it's difficult perhaps to gauge numbers. There will be other counter demonstrations held in Dresden this evening, so we'll have to see what kind of numbers come out. But you know, here in Dresden it's an interesting phenomenon. It does seem to have really captured something in this part of Germany, ironically, because there's very little immigration in the state of Saxony and very few Muslims live here. Only 1,000 Muslims, it's estimated, actually live in Dresden itself. We've seen a huge number of counter-protests taking place in other German cities, and again, ironically, often the largest counter-demonstrations, those protesting against Pegida, are in cities which have large immigrant populations. Difficult, of course, to speculate as to why. One man said to me today, perhaps it's because people here have no real experience of living alongside what they would call foreigners, and perhaps that's the issue. But certainly there is something happening here in Dresden. The numbers who've turned out tonight would certainly underlie that.
Jenny, many thanks indeed. Jenny live from This is a newsroom from the BBC World Service. Sue has our headlines.
France is to deploy thousands of extra soldiers to safeguard vulnerable public places after last week's Islamist attacks in Paris. In addition, 5,000 police are to protect Jewish schools. Interpol has placed the former Ukrainian president Viktor Yanukovych on an international wanted list, and an Afghan government of unity has been announced after months of negotiations.
On news of Interpol action against Viktor Yanukovych, I got the details from our correspondent in Ukraine, David Stern.
What Interpol has said is that he's been put on a list, a red situation or a red grant, where they are requesting extradition or assistance for embezzlement, or expropriation of funds. This is something that the Ukrainians have been accusing Mr. Yanukovych of expropriating billions of dollars from the state budget.
So will they get it?
Well, as it looks, probably not. The Russians haven't formally said anything, but the things that are being said out of Moscow is that he will not be extradited. This is a request, or it's an offer of assistance, and so far the Russian police force has said that they're not going to hand him over, they're not interested in extraditing him.
And is this likely to increase tensions in Ukraine? Does Viktor Yanukovych still have much support?
Well, no, he doesn't have very much support at all. Even in the eastern part of the country, which was his bastion, his support was dropped. That's not to say that the government itself is gaining in support. So it's not going to necessarily be a point of issue between the two sides. What it will is raise tensions between Moscow and Kiev, possibly a little bit, although it has to be said the tensions are already pretty high.
David Stern in Kiev. Next to Pakistan, where pupils and teachers have returned to the school in the city of Peshawar, where at least 150 were killed in a Taliban attack last month, most of them children. Schools across much of Pakistan have reopened following an extended break prompted by that attack. Our correspondent Shaima Khalil sent this report from Peshawar.
Amid heavy security, higher fences and barbed wire, pupils made their way back to school. Despite the grief, many were excited to return, like 16-year-old Akif Azim.
We wanted to get back in, and now we have the opportunity. The fight is pretty much on, and what we have is a pen, and with which we will fight the war.
Since the attack, Pakistan's parliament has passed a bill to set up military courts to try terror suspects, and the Prime Minister has lifted a moratorium on the death penalty in a bid to tackle militancy. For Andalib Aftab, a teacher at the Army Public School, these measures have come too late. She lost her son Huzaifa in the massacre.
Many boys will come, will sit there, but I'll not be able to see Huzaifa again over there. But he has left. And it's actually our best in this world now. I don't want to cry, but this is actually not in my hands.
There are still many unanswered questions about what happened at the school that day. Despite that, Andalib says she's determined to resume her job.
I want to go back. I want to teach the students. I'm not reluctant. I'm not scared. Students, they are waiting for me to teach them.
But there are families here who are still reluctant to send their children back to school. They say the leadership hasn't done enough to prove that they can stop an attack like this one from happening again.
In Peshawar, Sue has some of those other news.
The Lebanese security forces have raided the country's largest prison, targeting a block where more than 100 Islamic militants are held. Officials said intercepted phone calls had linked inmates at the Rumiyah jail near Beirut to 2 suicide bombings in Tripoli on Saturday that killed at least 9 people. From Beirut, Aram told
Elite security forces entered the prison in the early hours of the morning. Pictures leaked from inside showed them in full riot gear as several police vehicles deployed in the main court of the prison. The Minister of Interior had promised several times to implement a security plan targeting the prison, which he described as a place from which terrorists graduate.
Members of Parliament in Burkina Faso have decided to cut their salaries by half. The move comes in response to heated exchanges on social media, after it was revealed that MPs sitting in Parliament in Ouagadougou are paid more than $3,000 a month. The average salary in Burkina Faso is about $150 a month. The Danish Crown Prince has been forced to issue a public apology for driving across a bridge that was closed when gale force winds made driving too dangerous. Prince Frederik was given permission to cross the barrier of Denmark's biggest bridge for his own security, but instead of parking and waiting for the weather to improve, he drove on.
A group of international scientists have signed an open letter calling for more research to avoid the dangers posed by AI or artificial intelligence. The letter acknowledges that computers, which can think for themselves, could bring huge benefits to mankind and even eradicate disease and poverty. But, as Newsroom's Julie Peacock explains, there are potential pitfalls to computers with a mind of their own.
Artificial intelligence is already having a huge impact on our lives. Modern manufacturing relies heavily on computers, and companies are already working on developing driverless cars. Scientists say the technology offers huge opportunities to improve our lives, but a group of leading experts are warning in an open letter that we need to make sure that humans stay in control of the technology. Martin Rees is Britain's astronomer royal and has signed the letter. He's calling for more research into the risks involved.
An obvious issue is if a driverless car crashes, who is to blame? Who do you sue? And if we start having robots which can interact with humans, this can be hugely beneficial, of course, but we have to make sure that they're programmed in such a way that there's no chance that they will, as it were, go rogue.
Trying to predict how intelligent computers could cause problems in the future may veer off into science fiction. But many leading names in science and technology say it's right to be cautious. The internet entrepreneur Elon Musk has warned that artificial intelligence is summoning the demon and is the biggest existential threat there is. And speaking to the BBC last month, the scientist Stephen Hawking had this stark warning about it.
I think the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. Once humans develop artificial intelligence, it would take off on its own and redesign itself at an ever-increasing rate. Humans, who are limited by slow biological evolution, could compete and would be superseded.
The letter now includes hundreds of signatories, including academics from the world's top universities. But as well as highlighting the potential pitfalls, it says we should embrace artificial intelligence, as it also promises to bring unprecedented benefits to humanity.
And that was Peacock reporting. If you've seen hashtag Fox News Facts trending today, you why? Well, it's because of what they said about Birmingham, Britain's second biggest city. A terrorism commentator on the station made this comment in the United States.
There are actual cities like Birmingham that are totally Muslim, where non-Muslims just simply don't go in. There's a situation that Western Europe is not dealing with.
Emerson talking on Fox News, where he has since apologised for his, quote, terrible error. James Bovill is a reporter with the BBC's radio station in Birmingham, Radio WM. He told me more about the city's Muslim population.
If we look at the last census back in 2011, the Muslim population of Birmingham stands at around about 234,000. So that's around about 22% of the total population of the city. So while, of course, that is a significant proportion, it's clearly a bit ludicrous to suggest that Birmingham is totally Muslim and that people who aren't of that faith never go into the city. And I think that's something that Steve Emerson clearly realised fairly quickly was a huge error when this story started going crazy last night on social media. He was pretty quick to apologise for what he described as a terrible error, for which I am deeply sorry. He's also issued a correction on his website and goes on to describe Birmingham as a beautiful city. He claims in that statement that he did rely on other sources, but goes on to say that's no excuse. And he went on to apologise to every single resident of Birmingham as well.
I'm just wondering where this could have come from. Are there parts of Birmingham where non-Muslims might be murdered?
Well, the discussion has really looked into that today on our radio station and across the wide BBC, and there are areas of Birmingham like Allen Rock and Spark Hill where there is a predominantly Muslim population, and there have been arguments and discussions over many years about whether they are closed off to other parts of the city, but there's clearly no suggestion that there are any particular parts of Birmingham where you should feel unsafe or where Muslims only go into that part of the city.
I know these comments have generated a lot of hilarity on Twitter. What do people in Birmingham think?
Well, it wasn't long after that video went viral that the people, not only of Birmingham, but then it went all across the country, across the world as well, started rallying to the defence of Birmingham and started to openly ridicule Fox News' often questionable accuracy. That's when this hashtag Fox News Facts began to circulate on Twitter, people pouring scorn on those comments by tweeting hundreds of nonsense facts, and it then became the #1 trend on Twitter. I'll read a few of them out for you just to get a sense of what they were like. The BBC Asian Network DJ Nihal tweeted, Ozzy Osbourne was part of a Muslim sleeper cell known as Black Shaheed, Ozzy short for Osman, and even Mozambique, the former Guantanamo Bay detainee, got involved, saying that Birmingham spelt backwards means Islamic State in Swedish. So plenty of humour as well as some anger and incredulity as well. But we've also been asking people on the streets of Birmingham for their reaction. Here's what people in Birmingham today made of his comments.
I think it's crazy. Like, this is completely untrue. Like, I've been born and bred in Birmingham and I've never seen anything like that in my life.
Does he mean Birmingham in America? You can't mean Birmingham here, surely?
Well, he's in America. They should mind his own business over there and not ours.
The Prime Minister David Cameron has commented on this, saying, "When I heard this, I nearly choked on my porridge and thought it must be April Fool's Day. This guy is clearly a complete idiot." But one good thing to come from this is Steve Emerson has promised to make a donation to Birmingham Children's Hospital.
James Bogle in Birmingham, which Telly Savalas, of course, once called my kind of town. Sue has the summary next. That's it from the newsroom.
Documentaries on the BBC World Service.
Nigeria.
These lively children are learning the Quran, and the only schools the insurgents haven't attacked so far are madrasas.
Iran.
Iran officially recognizes gender dysphoria, but gay and lesbian people claim they are being pushed into changing their sex as if they're cured from homosexuality.
In a country where the internet is censored and the media is fully controlled by the state, many watched in awe as a daughter gradually turned against her father's old regime. Ireland.
There's a freshly dug grave of one among several women who died this year. Some of these women have become so institutionalized that they lived, they worked, and they died in the care of the nuns.
Wherever in the world a story needs to be told, we'll be there. Assignment. Online, bbcworldservice.com.
Coming up in World Business Report in just a moment, half an hour of voices from around the world, explaining what you need to know about the world of work and money. We hear from Greece, where a radical anti-austerity party is ahead in the polls, 2 weeks before the general election there. We ask what this means for the stability of Europe. Plus, President Obama announces his latest plans to protect people's private data online. And we circle round to discuss the main takeaways of management jargon. All that after the latest world news.
BBC News. France is deploying large numbers of extra security forces around the country after last week's terror attacks. 10,000 soldiers will be called up to guard sites, including transport hubs and tourist spots, while about 5,000 police officers will protect France's Jewish schools. The Turkish authorities have confirmed that the partner of one of the Paris gunmen did pass through Turkey on her way to Syria, but they say there was no request from the French government to bar the entry of Ayat al-Madian, who is described by France as armed and dangerous. Interpol has put the former Ukrainian president, Viktor Yanukovych, on an international wanted list. The authorities in Ukraine accuse him of stealing billions of dollars and of ordering snipers to fire on anti-government demonstrators in the capital Kiev last February. The government of Afghanistan has nominated a cabinet of 25 ministers, more than 3 months after the new president, Ashraf Ghani, was sworn in. It comes after months of negotiations with Mr. Ghani's chief executive officer and former rival, Abdullah Abdullah. The United States says Cuba has now released all 53 political prisoners that it promised to do as part of an historic deal to normalize relations. The military in Cameroon says it's managed to fend off an attack by Boko Haram insurgents on one of its bases in the north. A military source told the BBC the rebels moved in from across the Nigerian border. The army says one soldier and several rebels were killed. The Danish Crown Prince has been forced to issue a public apology for driving across a bridge that was closed when gale force winds made driving too dangerous. Prince Frederik was given permission to cross the barrier of Denmark's biggest bridge for his own security. But instead of parking and waiting for the weather to improve, he drove on. BBC News.
This is World Business Report. I'm Amy Keewer. Anti-austerity parties in Greece remain likely winners of this month's general election, despite warnings the country might go into a forced bailout of the Eurozone.
There is still some risk that there could be contagion. Other countries could also be dragged in a similar direction as Greece.
We ask what this means for the stability of Europe. Plus, President Obama is proposing tougher laws to protect US consumer data. And we have the year of the rabbit or the dragon, but what about the year of the ruble?
The car turned off, the power steering was unresponsive, it was very hard to stop, so I was basically just moving, coasting along, with no control.
And has your patience with management speak timed out? Well, you're not alone. Action.
Dazzling combination of two of the most irritating bits of jargon ever resonates with my radar so powerfully. I fear I'm next to break it.
You can tell Lucy Kellaway isn't happy, and that's all coming up. But first, it's 2 weeks until Greece goes to the polls in a general election that could change the fate of Europe. The current Greek Prime Minister, Antonis Samaras, is having a hard time convincing voters to stick with him after years of belt-tightening and hardship. The radical left-wing Syriza party, led by Alexis Tsipras, has moved from the fringe of political life to centre stage. It wants to end austerity and dump most of the conditions attached to the country's bailouts. Syriza began the campaign ahead in the polls, and despite several reported warnings from German officials that Syriza's policies could mean Greece being thrown out of the Eurozone, public support for the party is undiminished. So what are the prospects for the last 2 weeks of the campaign? I spoke to Dimitris Kotadis, who's political editor at ANT1, a leading TV station in Athens.
What they say is that we're going to get into a big new discussion with the European Union and the IMF in order to change the whole economic policy that Greece has followed the past 2, 3, 4 years. I don't know how they're going to do this, since what everyone in Europe says is very clear. You have to do what you have signed to do. You have to obey the rules of the European Union. But so many people here in Greece think that even if Syriza wins the elections, they have to follow a similar path to what Samaras government followed the past couple of years, which means that very soon Syriza will have internal problems. That's why the whole situation in Greece is very unstable, and it will be unstable for many more months, which is very bad for the economy, it's very bad for the social cohesion, and of course it's very bad for those people that they want to put money in the Greek economy so it could have a start running again.
So is Syriza essentially then a protest vote if people don't really believe that they will be able to take a different course and get rid of austerity altogether?
It's very hard to get rid of the austerity altogether right now, because although the Greek economy has made a great progress, the Greek population has suffered a lot. The majority of the Greek people has lost a lot of money. They have seen their salaries going down 60-70%. We have a 26% of unemployment, which is like 65-66% plus in the ages of 20 to 30 years old. So you have an economy that is recovering in the numbers, but this hasn't gone down to the population. So whoever gets elected the next day, he has to give something to the people. And this is very crucial for the next government to be stable. However, this is very difficult because all the messages that come from the European Union, the IMF, and everywhere else, the messages are clear. You have to keep going the same way, the same path, you have to keep following the same path you have followed the past years. So I doubt that even Samaras or Tsipras can easily rule and govern the next day here in Greece.
So you're saying essentially, despite all the political wrangling that's going on, whoever gets into power has their hands tied, and there's no real option for any significant change in the prospects for the economic policy.
Yeah, that's true. Samaras clearly says this, that we have to obey the rules and follow and do what we're supposed to do. On the other hand, Tsipras says that I will be able to change the whole situation in Europe, and I think that it's going to be very interesting if Tsipras gets elected, because we have to see how Europe is going to react. Brexit has come to the public debate here in Greece again. Samaras accuses Tsipras for what it does what he says he's going to do. Greece will be easily kicked out of the Eurozone. However, Tsipras believes that he can get down to the same table with Merkel and all the other parties and get a good deal for Greece, which right now I think is going to be a very, very, very difficult situation. He's going to be in a very difficult position if he decides to follow the path he says he's going to follow.
Dimitris Kotadis there. Now all this points once again to the possibility of a Greek exit from the euro and the economic chaos that entails. Banks in Europe are testing their internal systems to see if they could cope with this possible so-called Brexit. Now, Hugo Dixon is from Reuters Breaking Views and has been following events in Greece closely. I asked him about the current scale of the worry.
I think they're a little bit worried, but not very worried. I mean, I think that you have to contrast now with 2012, when there were last general elections, two actually back-to-back, and Syriza almost won then, and then the rest of Europe was running scared, because they thought that if Greece went down the funnel, it would drag a lot of other countries with it, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, possibly Italy, and then possibly the whole of the Eurozone would collapse as a consequence. Now they're not so worried because a lot of things have been done to shore up Europe's defences. That's the Eurozone's defences in the last 2.5 years. The most important thing was in the middle of 2012, Mario Draghi, the president of the European Central Bank, said he would do whatever it takes to prevent the euro disintegrating. But that doesn't mean that Europe is totally sanguine about a possible default and possible Greek exit from the Eurozone. There is still some risk that there could be contagion. Other countries could also be dragged in a similar direction as Greece.
Are we already seeing things like capital flight from Greece? People are already worried that their money is just not safe in that country.
It's not happening big time yet. I think that it's more likely to step up, if it happens, after a general election, and particularly if it's impossible for anyone to form a government, and if we have a sort of repeat of what we saw in 2012 with two back-to-back general elections, then I think that people may start getting scared and they may start taking money out of the banks. And the problem is that Greece's programme runs out at the end of February. If that end of February deadline isn't shifted, people in Greece could get increasingly nervous because they'll know that after the end of February there won't be a lender of last resort to the banks.
And what would happen to Greece then? Would that mean an inevitable exit from the euro? Would the country collapse?
If you actually crossed that deadline and there wasn't a safety net for the banks and the bank started, the only thing that the Greek government could sensibly do is impose capital controls. They have to say, you can't take your money out of the bank, and you can't take your money out of the country, you can't transfer money out from one bank, you can't use your bank account to pay for goods and services. And that could go on for very long without Greece leaving the euro.
Now this all sounds very disorderly, and we've come up to this threshold a couple of times. Wouldn't it be better then for the European powers to accept that this is likely and agree to a programme where this happens in an orderly way?
Well, nobody has come up with a way for a country to leave the euro in an orderly fashion. That's really the problem. If there was an orderly way, then I'm sure that quite a few countries would have left already, but they're locked inside it.
Hugo Dixon from Reuters Breaking News there. Now, listening to all that, and with me in the studio is Jeremy Baxter from stockbrokers Charles Stanley. Welcome to the programme, Jeremy. So, tell me a little bit about the market reaction to events in Greece. There's a lot of political turmoil on the ground there. Are we seeing this reflected?
Yes, I think we are. It was a roller coaster day today with European equities rising quite sharply at the open, largely in anticipation of another round of easy monetary policy from the European Central Bank. The European Central Bank, of course, concludes its Governing Council meeting on the 22nd of January, 3 days before the Greeks vote, and the markets are agog with the suspension of quantitative easing in government bonds. But how can they, when perhaps Greece might repudiate 50% of its debt, as it promised it to, and it appears over the weekend Germany might be mollifying its position in relation to this, implying that perhaps there is a means of working to some sort of deal with Greece should Syriza win the election. All this playing on investors' minds, creating conditions of increased volatility.
And we heard that Europe could be better equipped than, say, in 2012 to deal with any crisis that could emerge. Do you think that there's any strength in that?
No, I don't. No, I tend to agree with the last commentator. It seems to me that the Eurozone was created with opportunities for countries and states to participate in the project, but nothing has really been put in place to ensure how the exit were terms not to be complied with if they haven't increased. It has to be said. In contrast to the earlier commentator, I don't think Greece's economic position has really improved. You can play around with the definitions of data, you can play around with starting dates, but the fact of the matter is the Greek economy remains in an appalling mess, and indeed, Katharine is reporting that the Greeks aren't even filing their tax returns anymore. That doesn't strike me as an economy on the mend.
Jeremy Batson-Cart, thank you very much indeed. And just a word from the markets, we're getting news now that Brent crude has dropped further in price. It's now at $47.27 a barrel, which is at its lowest level since early 2009, which reaches new lows lower than we saw last week when it also saw a slide there. And elsewhere in the markets, in New York, the Dow is down 0.5% at 17,655, and in London, the share index of the company is at 65.01. Now you're listening to BBC World Service, the world's radio station. Hello to our listeners in the port of Spain, Trinidad, on 98.7 FM, and good evening to you in Jerusalem, listening on medium wave 1323 kilohertz. Now it's supposed to be easy. You go online, you see something you want, enter your credit card details and click, it's yours. For the price you pay for the convenience of internet shopping is handing over important information to these retail firms, and then who knows what happens to it. In the United States, President Obama is calling for new privacy laws to protect consumer data once companies get hold of it online. And to tell us more, the BBC's technology reporter Dave Lee joins me now in the studio. Welcome, Dave. So what exactly is Obama proposing?
Well, Obama's trying to reassure people that their data in the US is going to be safe, and he started by kind of talking about the hot hacking topic of the moment, which is the Sony Pictures hack. He began by saying that, and here's what he had to say about that.
As we've all been reminded over the past year, including the hack of Sony, this extraordinary interconnection creates enormous opportunities, but also creates enormous vulnerabilities for us as a nation and for our economy and for individual families. So this week I'm laying out some new proposals on how we can keep seizing the possibilities of an information age while protecting the security and prosperity and values that we all cherish.
So it's quite a big promise there from Obama. Now, key to this new proposal is the Personal Data Notification and Protection Act, and the crucial policy within there is that customers have to be told within 30 days if their data has been breached somehow, stolen by hackers. So that's quite a short time frame, and many companies are quite nervous. It's often hard to know whether a breach has occurred and how important it is to tell the customers that may be affected.
Although, of course, as a consumer, you'd probably think, I only hear about this a month after it was hacked. I guess it's all relative compared to whether you're a consumer or the company.
Well, companies argue that they want to get all the information and have the evidence at hand, because there's nothing worse than going out and saying we think it's this bad, only to find out that it's either a lot worse or not as bad as you thought. But over the past year, we've had so many big breaches, places like Target, which was 40 million credit cards stolen, Staples, 1.16 million stolen, and banks like JP Morgan, all stuff like this. So I think people are starting to say we have the right to know as soon as possible so we can protect ourselves. Part of the benefit as well is to offer increased protection so you can check credit scores, for example, to see if you may have been affected by any of these things.
So this all deals with people who are shopping online, people who have their data stored because they clicked and bought something. But he's not just addressing consumers, there's other sorts of data as well, isn't there, that falls under these proposals?
There is, yes. So one of his main concerns is about educational data. So many schools in the US and of course across the world use very sophisticated technology to learn now, and part of one of those things those types of software does is it collects data about the users. And our complaint from Obama was that some companies creating the software were using the data gathered to target advertising and do other things like that. So part of this act is to make that against the law. You can only gather data if that data is being used for educational purposes. Nothing untoward, no target advertising
come as a result.
And is this going to be seen as enough by people whose data they feel people's almost out on the loose?
I think there's a big worry, isn't there? And having things like the Sony Pictures hack, where it seems like a kind of Wild West out there on the internet, this will be a couple of steps to try and help that out. And what it doesn't do so much, and we yet to see the real detail of this, it doesn't really suggest how they're going to combat the problem in the first place. Now, Obama in his speech did mention about closing loopholes in the law. What he was meaning by that was it's very hard to prosecute people that are in different countries. So particularly in places like Russia, for example, there's a big cyber crime swell of people that are hacking. It's very hard to go after those people. So there's now efforts to do this around the world, and we're seeing it in Europe as well. Similar legislation being pushed through that will make companies more responsible, but also make it easier to get hold of those people that might be doing the crimes.
Dave Lee, thanks very much indeed. That was BBC's Dave Lee. Now, 7 years ago, 2 of the 3 big US car makers, General Motors and Chrysler, went bankrupt. Those dark days are all a distant memory. So last year saw the best sales in nearly a decade. A turnaround, you might think, but also in 2014, it was a year for the recall. More than 60 million cars were recalled in the States, the highest number ever. So how can it be such a good year on the one hand, yet such a bad year on the other for the car industry, all at the same time? The BBC's Samira Hussain explains from the North American International Auto Show in Detroit.
The Chevrolet Volt represents a truly major milestone in the development of the modern electric vehicle.
The theme for GM at the Detroit Auto Show is fuel efficiency. It's just released a new version of its hybrid car, the Chevy Volt. But it was actually a different car that took center stage. I'm standing in front of a bright orange 4-door car. It's actually Chevy's new Bolt, which was just unveiled today at the Detroit Auto Show by GM CEO Mary Barra.
This is a real game changer.
This is an all-new electric concept car. It has a range of about 200 miles per charge, and at the moment, it's being priced at $30,000. The Volt could be a real turning point for General Motors, a company that wants to steer away from the rocky road of 2014. Last year, it recalled more than 30 million